Welcome to Rekindled Faith with Melanie Bearda. Whether you've been wrestling with questions, facing doubt, or simply just uninspired, let's dive into what it means to be authentic followers of Christ. Hello, everyone, and welcome today to Rekindled Faith with Melanie Bearda. I'm excited to introduce my next guest to you. This is Richard Suttles, the Faithiest Atheist. Richard, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. As she said, I'm the Faithiest Atheist. I have a Facebook page and a pathetic YouTube page, and that's about it. But I'm happy to be here.
Awesome. And you're all the way in Arizona, is that right?
Yes, we're in Arizona.
Nice. Is it hot right now?
It's actually perfect right now. It's here we're in the valley, so it's where it gets to be like 120 sometimes.
Okay.
But right now it's absolutely perfect. So we have a few months where it's just really, really nice, and today's one of those days.
Awesome. All right. Well, I invited Richard to chat today because he is probably the most kind atheist I've ever encountered on the internet. And so I don't know, I guess last year we connected. I
Hmm.
think you started following my Facebook page first, and I was like, Faithiest Atheist? Is this guy a Christian or not a Christian? What's going on here? So,
Yes.
how long have you had your Facebook page?
Well, I think I started doing this maybe around 2018 and 2019, but to really formalize it onto a page, maybe a couple of years after that. But like around 2018, I decided I'm going to be this way, and then I think 2019 was my first apologetics conference. I've been going to church in and out because whenever someone invites me, I'll just go. And we live in an area where there's mostly Mormons, so we're often invited to the Mormon wards. So attending church has always been a thing for me. I guess I walked away from my faith in my 20s, and I'm in my 50s now. But during all that time, I would gladly go to church. But yeah, like around 2018, 2019, I'm like, I'm going to go, specifically to kind of understand and listen, and try to understand how to engage and interact respectfully with Christians. So that was my take. And then I also wanted a name that was like implying like, not that atheism is the only way or that Christians are brainwashed. I wanted to come up with something like the weak atheist or the maybe atheist, something like that. And then Faithiest popped up. I think someone said you're more faithy than other atheists, and I was like, oh, I'm the Faithiest Atheist. So I grabbed that and made a Facebook page. I started going to apologetics conferences, and I've been doing it since then.
Okay, awesome. So I'm super curious, like, what is your motive or your intention for being involved in apologetics on an atheist side?
The biggest thing was I work in the counterterrorism industry in the counterterrorism world. I've been doing that for 30 years. And I read, most of my day is spent reading the worst of the worst. People screaming and yelling at each other and making accusations that the other person isn't really a person or the other person is intellectually or morally inferior or even blocked. Sometimes they'll say, you're just blocked. You don't have the intellect or the morality to even join this discussion. And I see that so often. And then I notice that it got that way even more in the world, especially after like 2010. I started to notice when social media really became so prominent. I was like, man, there's people out in the world talking just like the terrorists. And I want to caveat that there's a lot of angry people that talk to each other like they're not people anymore, but they would never kill anybody. I mean, most people can get really, really angry and sort of isolated or even popular and just become sort of a bitter person, but not actually harm anybody. So I say sometimes there's language that sounds like a terrorist, but I mean, like in our job, if we meet somebody who's angry and seems they talk like a terrorist, that doesn't mean anything. They actually have to have weapons. They have to have picked targets. They have to be practicing, and actually literally planning a physical attack for us to really get on our radar. So yeah, I want to throw that out there. I said there's just so many people talking like that I want to counter that with a different type of language and mindset. So that was my inspiration was to try to uh, be a different kind of voice. And that was why I followed your page, because I think you probably responded to something. Who's the handsome, muscular Christian guy? Huff.
Oh, Wesley Huff. I thought you were
Yeah, yeah.
talking about
What?
yourself. Yes,
No, no,
Wes Huff.
no, no. I got nothing on West Huff. I want to one day have a pull-up contest with him, but he looks like a comic book hero, Christian.
Especially when he starts throwing swords around.
Yes, yeah. So you said something on one of his pages, and then I said, I like how she thinks, and so I think that's what I joined your page, which, yeah, you're right, was about maybe a little bit less than a year ago.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah, so like I appreciate the fact that you're an atheist. You're like a very out well, obviously I'd love for you to come over to my side, but I appreciate the fact that you are the type of person that I can enter into a conversation with, have a discussion, ask questions that would maybe offend other people and cause a little bit of turmoil. So I've really appreciated having that connection with you and just being able to have conversations around faith or life or people. And I also enjoy, like, for myself, I think that you have like a degree in sociology or something like that. Is that correct?
Two postgraduate degrees. They're both focused on radicalization and the neurology of why people do that. One is in communications and one is in international relations. But the focus in both cases was why, especially, people would get more radicalized. Not just communications in general or international relations in general, but how radicalization can be involved in that stuff.
Yeah. See, and I find that all fascinating. Like
Mhm.
when you think about the human mind and how people think, and how if you're put into a certain circumstance or situation, enough pressure will cause somebody to like explode.
Yes,
And we always, I think, like society as a whole, we just have this expectation that people are supposed to be like totally even all the time and
right,
manage their emotions fine. But really, at the end of the day, like growing up as a child, I don't remember being given like actual skills for coping with my feelings and my
right.
emotions. It was just if I got really frustrated and feel like my voice wasn't heard, then it would be like, you need to stop now. So there was
Hmm.
never a solution based approach to it. And I'm just one person. But from my personal work and professional work with, I used to be an addiction support worker, and I also used to work with at risk youth. And
Okay.
so, like, I've seen people at the literal end of their their threshold, essentially.
Right.
So,
You probably seen it more personal than I have. I see it a lot when I read people's testimony. When I say testimony, in my case, in our job, sometimes when people commit to terrorism, they'll write something like a testimony. But for me, I'm more distanced from them. I'm reading, maybe watching a video or reading their words, but you're actually interacting with them personally
yeah,
when
yeah.
people reach that point.
Yeah, and it's been interesting to have the privilege of being able to walk with people through really hard times and like come out the other side where the light is at the end of the tunnel and watch
Hmm.
them. But of course,
Yes.
I've also watched like people that didn't come out the other end, the light on the other side, essentially,
Right.
where they were overtaken by their own emotions or whatever life circumstances they had to face, and then I like some people I don't even have any idea where they are or if they're still alive. Like they're just gone.
Wow. Yeah, I often say that the radicalization process is a lot like an addiction. It's like a mental addiction. But then I also say there's two caveats to that. Is one is that you can be radicalized towards good things. So when I say radical, in our job, when we say radicalized, we mean someone who's radicalized towards dehumanizing and towards violence. But some people are radicalized towards, I'm just going to be a better person than that. They're radicalized towards being respectful or loving. And so radical isn't always a bad word, but it's used that way so often that people assume that I'm saying if you're religious or if you're a passionate atheist that you're radicalized like a terrorist. But no, you can be radicalized for very helpful things. So I actually recommend be radicalized for something. Find something that's important to you and stand up for it. I would just say try not to hate people who don't do that. Who don't they're not in love with the thing that you're in love with as much. It's tempting to want to hate them and dehumanize them, and that can be very addictive, and they can start behaving very much like a drug addict when they're like that.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so just like going back a little bit. So you grew up in a church. You went to a
Yep.
Baptist church growing up.
Hmm.
And then, as you had already mentioned, you walked away from faith in your 20s. So, can you just kind of walk us through what happened to cause you to walk away?
Yes, it was probably like a 5 or 6 year process. So probably as a teenager, um, having questions and then having the adults in my church handle it differently, having different answers, and then also it didn't bother them. Like if I at school, if I asked my fifth grade teacher a math problem or my seventh grade teacher a math problem, they would give me the same answer. But in this case, I'm asking a question and I'm getting different answers, and then I'm like, well, they just said this, and they're like, well, either they're wrong or it doesn't matter. It was very dismissive, and I don't mean dismissive in a bad way because my church absolutely loved me and just a great bunch of people, and they still love me. We're still welcome to go there now. I grew up in Georgia and we live in Arizona now, but when we go visit my parents, we can easily go to church and they'll be glad to take us in. But they just didn't know how to handle that. And over about 5 or 6 years, I began to think, what if this is just something where people just kind of come up with what they think is right and then they just go with it. They just draw the line and they're like, this is how it is. And I still think that. So, probably in my low to mid 20s was when I finally had finished walking away. Now I'm in my almost mid 50s. So I'd say for 30 years, I've thought that. I've handled it differently. How I treat people has not always been like this. I went through an angry atheist phase and religious people are brainwashed phase, and I went through that. But maybe through trial and error, and maybe through studying people at work, seeing people being so hate filled, all of that together made me realize that I needed to come at it a different way.
Okay, and so at the time when you walked away, were you in the Marines then?
I would say by the time I was in the Marines, I by then I was out.
Okay.
I had walked away. Now I realized in the Marines there's a lot of people who still believe in God, and usually the way Marines talk about God is he's a little bit more merciless, and he's a
Mm.
little bit more like, hey, I want to do this nicely, but sometimes I need to send in the Marines. So there's a lot of Marines who saw themselves like that, and so a lot of Marines were still believing, and maybe I was inspired by some of that, but by then I was probably fully out.
Okay. So obviously, I'm a Christian. I'm passionately in love with
Right.
Jesus. Yeah, I know. I love Jesus so much. He's awesome. I love him. So my question though, like I think that a majority of the people that would listen to my podcast would also identify as Christian. Maybe now you'll bring in some non-Christian people, but
I
uh
hope so.
m- yeah, my question for you though is like how could a Christian better approach having discussions with atheists, or is it even possible to do so? Just a little bit of context, like when I post a happy Christian video on Instagram,
Hmm.
I will hashtag all the Christian things, and then without fail, I'll have atheists come in there and tell me that I'm delusional, that I believe in Sky
Yes.
Daddy, and that it's all a fairy tale and all those things.
Yes.
So, like, sometimes it gets exhausting and I just stop answering because I don't think that they really want answers.
Right. They're
But
not engaging. That's not engaging.
no.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
agree.
so, like, from your perspective as an atheist, how
Hmm.
can a Christian come into a conversation with an atheist that doesn't leave everybody ripping each other's hair out?
Yeah, so I have several things to say about it, and raise your hand if I start rambling for too long. Um, the first thing I want to say is that I, I think that anybody can be a zealot, and by a zealot I mean that you find something that's really important, you want to uphold and defend it, and then you might want to attack other things to say, hey, that's wrong, my thing is right. And anybody can do that. And as you've already seen, there's atheists who are like that who will search for tags, and when they see the tag, they'll just go in and throw in their stuff and either leave or they'll hope that you'll try to throw something at them, and they'll be like, oh my gosh, please not this again. So I liken that to Puritans, that they're warriors for the cause, and they just want to troll and belittle you, and you probably can't engage. So the first thing I would tell Christians is understand that some atheists are like that. You're just like dealing with someone from another religion who has their sacred stuff. They hate your sacred stuff, and no matter what you say, they're gonna have a mindset about you. They're gonna have accusations about you, and there's probably nothing you can do other than not do it. because I work in the federal government, I have some friends in the Secret Service, and they said that Mike Pence used to say, don't earn it." When people are coming after you, Mike Pence would say, "Don't earn it, don't deserve it." So, in other words, he would say, "You might be accused of all kinds of things, but don't step up and be that person." And I've heard that he actually tried to share that with his boss, and unsuccessfully. But Mike Pence set the standard for how to do that, because he never lost his cool. For 4 years, he maintained his cool and discipline, and no matter what people said about him, he was always like, "Hey, we're all this together. We're all Americans." Uh, so try not to earn it. You're going to get attacked. You're going to be accosted. You're going to be accused of stuff, and then just try not to deserve it. Although your brain's going to kick in and be like, "No, I can fight this guy." I would say try not to do that, because from observers, when observers watch two people screaming at each other, we don't care who started it. We just see two people being like, "You do this, no, you do this, no, you're an idiot," and we're just like, "Okay, two people who have lost. They're two people down in a pit, and I'm just not going to go down into the pit." Even if one of them is right, at that point, it's not. It doesn't matter who's correct or wrong. It's just they've both kind of lost the plot. Um, and then I also want to say it's very intuitive to get down into the pit, and to want to lash out and teach and instruct, and come at them as if you're from the high ground. So that's very, very intuitive. So just be cognizant of that and say, "Okay, I just don't want to have to do that." Um, and then you can change people. Like I've seen people who are angry, especially with me. I've seen people just come at me. I've had excuse me. I've had atheists and Christians come at me like, you're the worst of the worst. You're a deceiver, manipulator. All this. You're worse than the people who actively come at me because you're pretending to be a nice guy. I get plenty of that, and I'll just be like, "Yeah, yeah, maybe so." Watch out for me. You never know. Uh, and I'll do that, and then just over time, they're like, "Okay, either you're not that, or you're so good at it that I'm starting to think maybe I've judged you too harshly." So I've watched a lot of people calm down on both sides just by not sinking into it. Now, that being said, the way I learned to not sink into it was that I sunk into it over and over and over and over, and I'm like, "I got to stop. I got to stop." And at some point, I guess it would be like overcoming alcohol or something. I finally got to the point where I stopped doing, or I at least got to the point where I'm better. I'm much better at it than I used to be.
Mhm.
So that's my overall approach, is that they're behaving just like the religious people who have kind of screaming and yelling.
Mhm.
It's intuitive for them, and some of them you can't reach. All you can do is just not be that way. And then some of them you will be able to reach just by maintaining your discipline, and treating them as if they're just a person who's maybe not quite yet learned how to behave well.
Okay. And so what do you think causes atheists to be so angry sometimes?
I would say it's for anybody. You have a way that you think the world is.
Mhm.
You have, I use the word sacred a lot because I absolutely believe that I think every human has something that they see as sacred. Um, I've even heard like nihilists, people who said, "Hey, I'm a nihilist and nothing matters," and yet they can't wait to explain to me, why nihilism is so important. And I'm like, so even nihilism is important. You do have something that's important. You just kind of given it a label, and you've I want to say fall in love with that concept. So even though technically they're not supposed to care about anything, they seem to care about it. So I always think like an actual nihilist would just shrug and move on. But to turn and talk to me and like spend time with me to try to persuade me of nihilism makes me think they're at least not a full nihilist. So I think that everybody does that. And so an atheist would just, many atheists, it's nothing more than seeing damage that religion has done. Hearing other people like Richard Dawkins, say that, well, it's because religion is a mind virus, and once you catch it like a disease, then obviously it's going to mentally impair you, and you're going to start doing dumb things. But that's only part of the story. First of all, almost everybody's religious. So if we have a mind virus, then almost everybody has it. And even if you're not religious, most people are. They find something that's sacred and important, and they defend it and uphold it. So whatever that mind virus is, we all have it. So I don't agree with the mind virus approach. But hey, from their point of view, they're like, okay, this person believes in silly things. It's dangerous, and so I need to persuade them to stop doing it. and especially at the national level. They're like, I need to get out onto the national stage and wave my arms around and say, stop, this is madness, you're crazy. Uh, and some of them will be angry at Christians like you because you're being nice. There's some Christians out there that are like, oh, atheists are so stupid, they're so silly, and they just make fun of atheists all day. And they get so tired of the atheists get so tired of being bashed on those pages, they go find someone who's like, hey, what do you guys think? I just want to hear you. Then they're just like, because for them you're like an outlet. So that's what they're doing. They actually see Christianity as a danger, and they actually think that they ought to. The words ought and should. They actually think I ought to be involved to eliminate this threat, and other people ought to be involved in this battle as well. That's exactly what they're thinking. Uh, there was something I wanted to mention, and it was important, but I hope it'll come up later. I'm sure it'll come up to me later. But yeah, there's one more thing I want to add to that. It just eludes me right now.
Okay. I was just thinking too, obviously Christians are not without fault. And even
That was it.
yeah,
That
that's it.
yeah,
There we go. I
that's the
got it
thing.
for you.
Yeah, this was the thing is that if I've decided to be an atheist, let's say I go back to my 20s and I decide I'm going to be an atheist warrior, I've got thousands of years of content that I can go onto. I can into the history books and find times when religion caused people to do things uh, mean to other people, and then I can go to the news and I can find times where someone did something awful in the name of a religion today. And so between history and the news, I've got an infinite amount of content that I can just keep using. And I realize Christians do that too. They're like, well, atheists did this. And, there's this time in France when the non-religious philosophes, attacked religion. And there's this time in 19th century Russia where they literally went door to door looking for people who are religious. So it's not like atheists are excluded from this. But if I wanted content about religion being dangerous, I have an endless supply. And I always think of a Catholic friend of mine, and what she does is whenever she talks to somebody about Catholicism, is that the very first thing she'll do is she'll let them bring up the history of the child abuse, and she'll spend months just on that. She'll be like, "Yeah, that was awful. It's the worst thing I could ever imagine." She won't even talk about Catholicism. She'll just for months she'll be like, "Hey, this report just came out. The Catholics are trying to get out of it. This is awful. I can't believe my leadership isn't accepting responsibility for this." And she'll spend months doing that before she'll talk about why Catholicism might be true, because she knows if she doesn't own that, then they're just going to keep saying, "Oh, you're trying to get out of the kid stuff," and so she gets out of that by spending a few months just on that stuff to kind of own the problem, even though she doesn't do it. She she realizes it's a real problem. So I would tell you guys when atheists come at you and say you have this problem, you have to say, yeah, that I agonize over that, and atheists should be doing that too.
Yeah, I agree with you. Yeah, I've experienced that too. Like even I think a few months ago, excuse me. Uh I think it was on your page or somebody posted something and then I responded and then I was having a dialogue with an atheist and I was
Hmm.
like, "No, no, no, it's cool. Like I just want to understand your perspective." And then out of
Yeah,
nowhere, some Christian comes and just brings down the sledgehammer and shuts down the whole discussion and I'm just
that
like,
happens.
"Come on."
Yeah, I hate that, and it happens a lot on my page. Sometimes I'll just delete it because I'm the admin, so I can just
Yeah.
delete it.
You got
But
the
yeah, I've
power.
deleted. I've deleted Christians and I've deleted atheists. And when I delete an atheist, man, they're like, I thought you were a person. I thought you
Yeah.
were a human being. You just deleted me, and I'm like, yeah, but you weren't helping the conversation. You were just kind of beating down.
Weren't contributing.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So obviously, like Christians are not perfect. We have a long history of negative impacts on culture, society, all those things.
Right.
Um, and like I even think yeah, like even in how you described it, it's like the reconciliation. If I want to have a conversation, a heart-to-heart conversation about who God is, what Christianity is, what God
Hmm.
has done in my life, then I need to be able to establish a relationship with another person in order to
Hmm.
have the presence to be able to actually share those things.
Right.
And I've just found it really interesting since I started my page of just having those conversations with atheists and Christians
Hmm.
alike online and just like asking the questions like what has brought you to this place of either passionately loving God or passionately hating God or or just like wanting to cause so much discord and disorder online.
Right.
And it's interesting because, like, not every time, but sometimes I get into some really interesting conversations with atheists, and sometimes they come from a long history of brokenness in the
Right.
church, and then they've chosen to walk away.
Right. And that's another thing, you Christians have to deal with is that you're the dominant religion. So since you're dominant, all the reports about which side does more or less or something else, they're all skewed towards Christians because most people are Christians. So you just have to say if they do a report on who's more happy, more Christians because there's more Christians. Which side has more crimes, more Christians because there's more Christians. Who's more in prison, more Christians because there's more Christians. So it's not fair to when atheists and Christians say, well, our side does this side more, or oh, there's more of you. It's a Christian world. It's like Glenn Scrivener. Do you know Glenn Scrivener?
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
book, The Air We Breathe, and even an atheist, Tom Holland, says it's the we swim in Christian waters. So for all the Western cultures, especially that are so influenced by Christianity, we're speaking that language. So we're using that mindset to have these conversations, and so it's good and bad, but because A, you have a lot of dominance, but B, that just gives more people freedom to have taken it and done whatever they wanted to with it. Uh, and then you can say, well, God, lets that happen, or God grieves when that happens, or this is all meticulously planned. However Christians think about how God deals with it, but it's something that's happening.
Yeah.
And I don't know that like I never try to make anyone an atheist. I never say like everything will be better when we're atheists. Mostly I say whatever you believe, you'll probably be more effective at it if you don't hate other people to the extent where you just dismiss them as humans. And if you assume the best case for most people, you'll probably do better off than assuming the worst for most people.
Yeah, totally. And like I've envisioned people as being like icebergs. Like you only see what's above the surface. You have no idea what's going on underneath.
Right.
And like for me, I grew up in a Christian home, but I walked away as a teenager, and
Mm-hmm.
then I came back in my like at 21 or so, young adult.
Mm-hmm.
And I really had to wrestle with God through a lot of what I guess people call now church hurt. But
Mm-hmm.
what it was for me really was this unrealistic expectation that I was placing on other people to
Mm-hmm.
give me what I now understand I can only get from my relationship with God.
Mm-hmm.
So for a number of years there, I tried just shoving anything and everything into that void within myself. And when I finally got to the place of surrendering my heart and my soul over to God, I finally had that release, that relief in my soul, and just the act of giving something up. Like I had been fighting for so long to try and make things work, but
Mm-hmm.
that simple act of surrender gave me the ability just to be present in the moment and choose to seek a different life. And from that, I've now been able to heal all of those past church hurts, traumas, whatever you want to call it. And I
Okay.
can see now, like, people are just people, regardless of what we believe, where we come from, what our perspective is, what experiences we have had. At the heart, at the core, we are people. And we
Yes.
will react and respond in similar ways. We will have the same emotional, like, spectrum and all of these things. And it's just, what are we going to do with it?
Right.
Yeah, so it's
Yeah.
been a go
I
ahead.
think that's a really good approach. Would be like if I'm just talking to Christians, is to acknowledge that there was problems going on, and whatever the reason for that is, just acknowledge that it's happening, but then just to remember why you believe it and why you still think it's important, and then just hold fast to that because people are going to be brutal. And you probably I don't know whenever I have these conversations with Christians at this point, some of them say that their biggest problem is other Christians, is that
Mhm.
they get a handful of atheists that are problems, but then they've got like another handful of really close Christians who won't go away, who are like, hey, you're being the wrong kind of Christian, and God's worried about you, and He wants me to tell you about it. So I don't know if you've experienced that or not, but just for all you Christians, be aware that you're not just going to be battling atheists; you're going to be battling more and more Christians who are going to tell you that, yeah, you're talking to Jesus, but Jesus has told me that you're talking to the wrong Jesus. That would be confusing to a kid, and probably it could be confusing to some adults as well.
Yeah, definitely. I didn't expect that when I came back into relationship with God. I
Hmm.
did not expect the fight or the battle that would come. Um, just I don't know. I guess I assumed that, oh, now I'm a Christian, everything's supposed to be happy hunky dory and everything's going
Hmm.
to be easy and we all understand and know the same things, and it just wasn't that way. And so, and
Right.
like for me, my whole ministry started essentially back during the pandemic. Um
Okay.
I started with wanting to write a book, which don't ask me how that's going cuz it's
Yeah.
not. But I'm
I don't want to
sure
write a
like
book either.
no. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um but it's like I've got a lot of other really good things happening. But
Okay.
yeah, back in 2020, I had a non-Christian friend post an anti-Christian memes like throughout the pandemic. And
Hmm.
I was just like, that doesn't represent the God that I serve at all. Like,
Right.
where is she getting that from? And so that really prompted me to recognize that I need to understand what I believe, and I need to be
Right.
able to articulate what I believe and share it with other people that may or may not be asking those questions. And for me, up until that point, like my faith was something that I just kind of kept for myself. I think some people knew that I was a Christian, but I wasn't overly like advertising my faith. And I think that was due to being reprimanded by a non-believer very early in my faith. A coworker had called me and told me that I was crazy and that I needed to denounce my faith, and just like totally ripped into me. And
Mm.
so that experience helped me to dig deeper into the truth of who God is in my life. But
Hmm.
it also kind of made me a little bit gun shy about being more and more open and honest about who I am, which I do
Yes.
find interesting because we live in a time where we talk about you do you and like seek out your truth and do the things that make you happy. And I find it interesting as a Christian because the things that make me happy are my faith, my relationship with God, reading the scripture, digging into it, and
Hmm.
learning from other believers. Like that brings my heart joy. So I find it interesting that we live in this like time. It's like post-Christian culture. Everybody wants to do their own thing, but if I'm
Hmm.
doing my own thing, which is pursuing my relationship with God, then I should just be quiet. I don't know. I find that interesting.
Well, and you know, we all fight. We all face the struggle of trying to empathize with other people's experiences, but also having our own standards. So like whenever I say, "Hey, people are all trying their best," usually someone will say, "Okay, well, ISIS is knocking on your door and they want to come in and kill your family. So you know, go tell them you be you. You know, give them a hug. Go give ISIS a hug." So you got to have some sort of standards for behavior, and you know, standards for how you think you should think and how you should treat others and how you should think of others. You got to have those standards. And then I think it helps to have empathy that other people's experiences are going to drive them to see things differently sometimes. Um, a lot of my research now is on neurology. And, you know, without getting into all the neurological reports, you know, some of these books back here talk about this, is that our brains will, once we become kind of mentally addicted to something, our brains will create these neural cortices, which is like physical parts of our brain to help with our mental fascination. So you could, you know, you can meet another Christian who sees it completely different, sees you as an enemy, and they're not just choosing to think of you that way. Their brain at that point has built physical structures that helps them immediately project that onto you, no matter what you say. And the same thing with atheists. So I always say, you know, be careful what you're mentally fascinated with, because your brain will go with that. It'll take it and it'll start building things to aid you to get there quicker. And that was probably, you know, again, I'm an atheist, so of course I'm going to say something like this, but it was probably a survival feature. There was probably a time in our history where your ability to get in line with your tribe, whatever it was, just get in line and defend it, probably aided in survival. You know, tribes that had uh, that kind of fierce loyalty and that kind of togetherness probably did better than the other tribes, because they were just so fierce. Even if they believed in something that wasn't true, you know, maybe their agriculture was better, maybe their hunting skills were better, maybe the way they took care of their kids was better because they believed in something more important than themselves. You know, even if the thing they believed in wasn't accurate. So you know, in my opinion, that's the why our brains do that. It's not really so much sin as it is just a survival feature. If
Okay.
I'm right, that's
If
how I
you're
see
right.
it.
Yeah. No.
Yeah.
Um Yeah, that's interesting. I've thought about that too. Like, I might have said this before, but the human brain automatically fixates on the negative too. Like
Right.
that's what that kind of
It
makes
can.
me think of. Like with the I don't know, the human brain is just so interesting and how it works. I really should go back to school one day, but right now,
I've got some good books that talk about how the brain operates,
yeah,
because we forget it's an organ inside of a skull.
yeah,
So the brain actually can't see anything. Everything the brain takes in comes from our senses around us, or whatever tendencies that it's born with. Because there's some things that we are born with, but everything it takes in is all signals from within the body, and things that our senses are bringing in. So it's doing the best it can. That's why, like, if a Christian says, "Hey, we're all broken," I'm like, "Yeah, I agree with that." But the reason why I think we're all broken is because our brain is stuck inside of a cave,
yeah,
and it's doing the best it can. So yeah, we are intrinsically broken. I could probably have a conversation with a Christian for 10 minutes, and he'll think I'm a Christian because I'll be like, we're intrinsically broken. We can't solve it alone. No matter how hard we want to solve it, we can't. He'll be like, "Oh yeah, you're a Christian," because that's the kind of language that a lot of you guys will use.
yeah, definitely. I think that you could definitely morph into the zone and no one would notice.
Right.
Um, Okay, I'd like you to talk a little bit more about the stuff that you do with apologetics, because I know
Hmm.
you go to apologetics conferences,
Hmm.
but you also go and speak to students, do
Yes.
you not?
Yeah, I do. I'll speak to groups. It's often students, mostly because you probably saw the Pew Research reports recently, but Christianity, or and especially evangelical Christianity, is diminishing. So a lot of evangelical groups are focusing on college kids and high school kids, and so they'll have like a week long immersion experience. And right now, there's three organizations that will hire me to come out, and I'm like the final exam because they know that I can get in front of a bunch of students, especially because I do physical in person presentations for my job. I can get in front of a crowd of people and talk, and then especially when I talk about terrorism, at like let's say in an auditorium full of people, I'll get a lot of feedback. I'll have to be able to juggle that and stick to my presentation, so they know that I have that skill. So I'll be like a final exam that after a week long experience of them saying, "Atheists are going to tell you this, you tell them this," then I'll come up and say, why I see things, and then they'll try it out on me. And they know that I won't scream at the kids. And they know that at some point, if it looks like the kid's losing his cool, they know that I'll be like, "You know what, you give me something to think about," they know that I'll uh, uh, mitigate the anger without them having to step in and correct them, because then it gets worse. If one of their adults has to step in, then the kid's embarrassed. But if I'm like, "You know what, you really you really taught me something," and he calms down because of that. So yeah, that's what I do a lot of that. Sometimes I'll just talk to groups of adults too, because sometimes adults are like, "How can you possibly not believe with all this evidence? How can you be a normal person? How can you make it throughout the day without being able to see evidence?" And so I talk about how sometimes our brain will stack up. I like to say our brains will stack the deck. It'll stack the deck as to how you perceive evidence. So we don't always see this because we're in our Western cultures, but there's Muslims and Hindus and Mormons who do the same thing. Their brains will only see. Can't say will only see. They have a tendency to really focus on the evidence that backs up what they're already thinking. And atheists do the exact same thing. So I try to say, maybe I'm stuck in this loop where my brain is making me do it, but I can otherwise drive a car and raise my kids and do my job. Or maybe you guys are doing it, and there's just more of you than me, or maybe we're both doing it, and we just it's harder to see. So I try to make a case as to that could be happening with us, um, and I just try to lower the temperature. And so a lot of times they'll hire me to come and say, "Look, these are human beings. They're not going to all scream at you." Now, some atheists will. Sometimes they'll have some atheist who's supposed to just come and go through a PowerPoint, and he'll send them the PowerPoint, and they'll approve the PowerPoint, and then he'll come and yell. So, it took a while for them to know me and trust me, and then once my name got around, then opportunities have really skyrocketed.
Awesome. Yeah, I wouldn't want somebody just yelling at kids. So
And especially with their kids, it's in my mind, even more have more of a responsibility when you're talking to, like, say, the high school kids. Like, there's been times where I'll go to a young adults or a college group and I'll be able to talk about some things, and then with the high school kids, not. And so you just kind of have to know what age group you're dealing with, and how to deal with that, and not not do something that would be unfair to do with kids. So once they knew that I could do that, then it was a good experience.
Awesome. So you brought up evidence.
Hmm.
So the Bible, to me, has evidence in
Hmm.
it because it is a historical document that has been
Hmm.
proven. I'm still researching that for myself. So a lot of what I know at this point, I've learned from other people that have done more research, like Wesley Huff,
Oh
for
yeah,
example.
people like him have done tons.
Yeah, and I'm sure there's like a lot of dry information
Yes,
that I would just like glaze over and not want to
right.
deal with. So I do appreciate like he does a lot of infographics and everything. Makes it easier for me to
Yes.
digest. But so like my question for you is as an atheist, what do you do with that evidence?
Um, the first thing I try to do is, because I already think that people, their brains kind of arrange themselves to accept some information more than others. Then that's the first thing I tell myself. And it might be something similar that you would go through if you went to like an Islamic university, and you heard the scholars say, all of astronomy and all of history confirms what we've said, and they'll bring out their charts and their algorithms. You might say, okay, this is something that people can do to themselves. Now, I try to do that as well with atheists. If I'm listening to an atheist lecture and he's like, all the science and all the history confirms that no gods exist, then I also tell myself there could be some of that going on too, where they're I call it building scholarship, and building scholarship is something that humans do. I mean, the Mormons are building scholarship. They're only 200 years old, but they do have a university. They do hire actual uh, you know, professors who are skilled in geology and biology and anthropology, and they bring them to the university. And whenever one of those professors finds something that could tie into the Book of Mormon, you better believe they're going to write a book. And not only that, it's going to be published and sent out to bookstores around the world. So there's only 20 million people who uh, use the label of Latter Day Saints, and out of those 20 million, even the LDS authorities will tell you, out of those 20 million, you're really only looking at about 4 million who say, this is going to be my life. I'm going to wake up and live this way, and raise my kids this way. But those 4 millions are usually like doctors, lawyers, politicians, um, and meaningful people who are really involved in their community and in politics. Um, but they're building scholarship. They don't have anywhere near what Christianity has, but they have a goal, and they believe it, and they're publishing these books and they're sending it around the world, and it's enough scholarship to sustain 4 million people. If anything, they're losing some of the kids because their methodology for bringing in the kids, where they go on their mission for 2 years, that's running into some problems. But in terms of just having the scholarship, they're doing it. So without question, there are humans who are building scholarship around their worldviews. And even like the Catholics, that lady I was talking about from the Catholics, she told me that, and I know I checked into that too, that the Catholics were building scholarship around an Earth-centric solar system. So when they went through that thing with Galileo, it's not like the Catholics were like, no, 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 our Bible tells us that the world is the center of the solar system. They were bringing out charts. They were bringing out entire manuscripts full of algorithms and saying, no, 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 look at the data, follow the science. The Earth is the center. So they were building scholarship for an Earth-centric solar system until they realized that was wrong. And now, and again, Catholics are the tip of the spear for science. They love science. Some of the greatest scientific breakthroughs were Catholics. But in that particular case, they were wrong, and they were building scholarship around the wrong conclusion. So I always say it's happening. It's something that happens. And then I just try to follow their reasoning. Because if someone wants to say that the people who wrote the Bible were talking about real places, um, and real events, for the most part, I agree. There's something the Smithsonian released a report about the Dead Sea Scrolls, um, not too long after the Dead Sea Scrolls became brought in, and they really started studying the Dead Sea Scrolls. And the Smithsonian report says the Bible has some of the most uh, attested history out of any history book. There's parts of the Old Testament that are just unassailable historically. So when Wes Huff says that, that's something that even the Smithsonian uh, agreed to. Now, further on in the report, it says, and then there's also some stories that that are mythical, and people believe those too. But our job isn't to confirm those, but the history part, a lot of that history is accurate. So it's not like people like Wes Huff, and I'm also a friend of Dan Wallace who does that too. Um, it's not like they're making it up, and it's not like they're just finding ways actively, consciously. Like, I know this isn't true, but I got to find a way. They really are going out and going to these sites and digging into it, and they are discovering things that back up some parts of it. So that part's accurate. So when I hear about that, I'm like, yeah, there's some things that probably are true, and then there's probably some stories in there too that might not be true. So that's what I tell myself as I look at those presentations.
Awesome. Well, I think it's a good time to kind of come in for a
Okay.
landing, but I just want to open it up for you one more time. If you have anything that you'd like to share or anything that's on your heart.
Yes. And I kind of alluded to this before, but again, for you Christians, when you're dealing with an atheist who doesn't believe, or you're dealing with another religion who thinks that you're doing something heretical with the wrong religion, or if you meet another Christian who is chastising you and saying that you're, offending Jesus, all of those are doing the same thing. The atheists, the other religions, and the other Christians are all uh, they found something sacred that conflicts with what you believe. They think that you're wrong, and they think that they need to correct you. So they're not just being mean. They're not just like, I don't like this guy's sweater. They're like, this person is wrong, and I need to correct him in order to be in good standing with God. And the atheist will say, in order to be in good standing with reason or the truth or whatever. But they're all doing the same thing. So keep that in mind when other people are chastising you. That's what they're going through. And then if you want to be even more humble, say, and they could be right. Somebody could pick up something that I didn't pick up on, and I could be wrong. So if you approach it like, I understand you're not personally attacking me, even though you're using that language, and even though you might be enraged, I understand you're not really doing that, and I understand that I could actually have some things wrong. I think it's much easier to navigate through all that.
Yeah, I agree. I think it gives a lot, like from a Christian perspective, if we meet people, excuse me, if we meet people, like even if they're upset with us about what we believe, with the heart of wanting to understand what it is that they're even trying to communicate to
Mm-hmm.
us, it gives us a lot of more opportunity to be able to actually understand where they're coming from, even if we don't agree with where they're coming from. But like we've already discussed, like people are people
Mm-hmm.
first, and everybody wants to have their voice heard, even if they don't find people that agree with it. Like we all have a desire to be heard.
Right.
So just having the respect and the decency to actually meet people where they're at. And from a Christian perspective, like it's my responsibility as a Christian to be the hands and feet of Jesus, regardless where I go or what I
Mm-hmm.
do. And if I am just going to be reactionary towards people, then how is that representing the God that I say I serve?
I like that.
Yeah, me too. Work in progress, but we're getting there. Well, I just want to say thank you,
Sure.
Richard, for coming onto my podcast today and just taking the time out of your day to be here. And yeah, it was a good conversation. I've enjoyed it. And as I've said before, like I've just really enjoyed the previous conversations that we've even had
Yes.
together, and the fact that you allow me to ask some questions that some other atheists would easily be offended by. So I do really
Well,
appreciate
and I
that.
knew we'd have a good conversation because we've been doing this for several months now. So I knew that one day we'd have a show and it would, work out glowingly.
Absolutely. It was well worth it. Well, thank you everyone for joining us this week. If you want to follow Richard on Facebook or on YouTube, he is the Faithiest Atheist, and I will have those links in the show notes. Have a great week. See you next time.